those tools is that those tools are really outside of Office 365, meaning all of them, try to look at in Office 365, but they're really orbiting it. They're not within the service. They're not utilizing some of the data that the service may already have about how you're potentially configured and whatnot to help you aid you in troubleshooting scenarios. So you're kind of like this this molecule, if you will. I think this is a pretty good representation of an electron cloud for those science people out there. And all of those tools, just like the electrons, they orbit outside the nucleus, which in our case would be Office 365. So that's the one real drawback of using these tools. They're great options and they provide tons of value, but they're really outside of the O365 experience. And then the other big drawback to really think about is when you run these, most of the time, if you call support or engaged Office 365 support before, you know that when we use these tools, we don't have any additional access, if you will, to the data. Meaning, the data you upload requires you to upload the data, meaning sometimes we have to have you run the results again to get them, and it's not exactly the most straightforward experience when you want to go out and get view diagnostic results or use those results to aid your troubleshooting. The question we really have now is how do we solve that, right? And why would we want to try something new is what I call it, because I'm really thinking about, all right, well, if we want to solve that problem, what do we do? So the Office 365 support teams and the product group teams that help build the product, they spend a lot of time over the last several months really re-examining how we do diagnostics and spending time investing in new diagnostic options to really streamline troubleshooting for customers. The goal is, instead of forcing customers to use a tool or asking them to use a tool, I should say, that's outside of our experience, to bring the diagnostic experience inside of O365. And when we think about that, this isn't really just a cosmetic, we're slapping on a GUI, if you will. It's really about bringing the experience and utilizing the best of what we have to offer with an Office 365 in our diagnostics experience. The other part of that is we've done a lot of investment into providing automated solutions, right? So if there's solutions that we can provide that either point you to the steps, the how-to steps you need, or guide you through solving a particular scenario, or in the most ideal case, solve the scenario on your behalf, we want to do that, right? So obviously, you don't want to spend time that you don't have to contacting support to resolve an issue, and everyone wants to self-serve, where possible, and resolve those issues yourself. So there's been a lot of consideration to those kinds of scenarios and a lot of thought put into how we can help help customers solve a lot of those key common scenarios they have throughout the life cycle of using Office 365. And lastly, the real key component where there's been a lot of focus is on being able to access and view the results, right? Like I said, as a customer, I've called many different IT organizations before in my own experience, and the biggest common request is I don't want to restart troubleshooting, right? I want to start where I left off. I'm an experienced IT professional. I've been in the industry for a little bit over 10 years, so I really know how to I know what I've done, right? So I don't want to be asked to start over, repeat steps that I know I've already completed. Well, in the past, because of some of the nature of how some of these other tools were built, they weren't in the service, meaning the support engineer had no context for the steps you may or may not have run, and it's hard to really convey that those steps were completed or examined in any repeatable or meaningful way as a customer. So the new diagnostics really focus on making sure that not only customers can view the results, but when I'm engaging support, they have those results in hand as well to help me resolve any issue that I may need assistance with troubleshooting. So when we think about diagnostic scenarios, we think about really kind of three phases of scenarios. And for me, that's really scenarios that are centered around preparation, scenarios that you run into when you're up and running, meaning when you've got to what we like to call run state, when you're you've set up the service and it's working for you and you've run into an issue, and then scenarios that really arise when you're doing plan changes. And when I think about plan changes, I'm thinking about scenarios where I'm maybe I'm expanding my organization or reducing it or consolidating it or doing some type of internal change that means something in my IT infrastructure needs to be updated. It could be as simple as changing a domain name. It could be as complex as expanding the service to incorporate multiple additional domains. So there's a lot of different types of plan changes that happen on a regular basis, and those have been all considered to see where diagnostics really makes sense to help speed up that process and really automate solutions where possible. So we're going to start by focusing really on the preparation phase, and think about, okay, what are the common scenarios or common things that we need to do when preparing to use Office 365. From a support perspective, we know oftentimes customers experience issues when trying to get that initial setup underway. So if you're an enterprise organization or you're a small business, you're going to probably experience most of your big questions around that initial setup phase, right? How do I get started in the service? How do I set up these basic configurations? How do I set up my clients and those type of scenarios? Well, when you think about those in support terms, those really come down to a certain set of checks, if you will. It really comes down to, okay, what do we know as the best practice, if you will, for how our client should be set up, or what issues that customers may run into while they're setting up the service, and how can we use that information that we have to help remediate a lot of those problems on behalf of customers, or walk them through the ideal use case in solving that problem. And for that purpose, there's a tool been introduced called the Office 365 Readiness Wizard. If you're familiar with some of the older legacy tools like OnRamp, or not Fast Track, but just OnRamp, this tool utilizes some of the work that was started there, but actually brings it together in a much more cohesive manner within the actual Office 365 support experience. So the beauty of this tool, to me, is that it's not an admin-only tool, right? This is something that users can use, administrators can use. It doesn't matter from a who can run it perspective, and it really targets a lot of the critical scenarios. So some of the basic things that users often have trouble with, meaning Office configuration, client configuration, think configuring Outlook, configuring Office 365 Pro Plus. Browser configurations, which also are still kind of common scenarios, meaning if I'm an admin that's looking to deploy Office 365, I should be able to check against maybe my baseline image or my baseline setup to see if, okay, are we ready, right? Let me validate this, because if I do see some issues or see some type of change that we need to make, for enterprise organizations, they have the beauty of maybe deploying a policy or a system center policy or what have you to get that change in place. Same thing happens though at the small business level. If I'm a smaller organization, I want to have a quick check that I can run, or have everyone in my group run, to really validate, okay, everything should run out of the box for me, or maybe I need to make a quick change in my configuration to make things actually work for me. And then also looking at some of the more advanced scenarios, when we think about what we like to call advanced configuration, so things like configuring directory synchronization, or even configuring things like SharePoint or Link Online Hybrid, similar questions arise, right? We always want to know, all right, how can I validate my organization is set up? How can I validate my configuration is in a known good state to either begin these deployments or tweak them or what have you? So the Office 365 Readiness Wizard really enables that functionality, allows us to do that type of testing at both the client level and the organizational level. So we're going to walk through what that looks like real quick. I'm going to give you a quick demo of how that tool works, and show you how you would use the Readiness Wizard as not only a user but also as an administrator to really validate that you're prepared to use Office 365. So bear with me one moment. I'm going to switch my screens here and bring up my there we go. Bring up my my session here. So you should now be seeing my my IE session. I'm inside. I'm about to log into one of my Office 365 tenants. If I can remember the password. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Hopefully that's the only demo snafu of the moment. So I'm loaded into the Office 365 Admin Center. And in this scenario, the only real requirement that we have for you is really the only real initial requirement we have to use the tool is to log in. I'm going to navigate to a URL, and I know this URL works for me because I've used it all the time, but it's aka.ms/checkmypc. And really, it's targeted. This is how I can access the Readiness Wizard without having to, navigate through the specific panes or figuring out, and I can quickly load the wizard. So what you'll see here is for my test tenant, within the context of that tenant, I'm loading the readiness wizard. You'll see the wizard offers me a couple of different options. It offers a set of quick basic checks that I can use, which are extremely useful in that user scenario where, say, I just really want to validate that my client is set up. I just want to validate that I'm in a good known setup. The readiness wizard really is targeted, the basic set of checks is really targeted at that scenario. When we're looking at more complex scenarios, thinking like directory synchronization configuration or exchange hybrid or link hybrid prep, we really want to think about running the advanced set of scenarios. And there's a warning in here that it may take up to an hour. In my experience, it doesn't necessarily take that long. It's usually a lot shorter than that. But for some environments, depending on how large your Active Directory is or complex it is, it may take slightly longer to run the checks. But in this case, we're just going to choose the basic checks, just with time in mind. And I'm going to click Next, and this should, knocking on wood, run for me and do a quick set of checks. So what it's really doing here is it's checking my environment and says, okay, well, there's a small client that has to run. It's a click once client. It's a one-time install. Once you install it, you never have to install it again. It auto updates and does all the things for you on the fly every time you want to run the wizard. But once you install that client, I already had it installed. It goes off and I can click Run Check. So once I initiate the checks running, there's a little click once pop up that happened on my other screen. It only stays up for a moment, but basically it starts this set of checks. Now these checks, like I said, they're validating not only my local machine, but they're validating my organization in general. I have in this tenant, I believe I have a couple of domains added already in this tenant and only a few users. But what it's doing is it's making sure that, okay, is my client set up properly to allow this thing to function? Are all my browsers configured properly? It's doing checks against not only IE, but it can do checks against other browsers as well. It's checking my DNS configuration. It's checking a couple of different places across the servers to really see if I'm in a known good state. Right? So not only am I getting the client level feedback, which is critical to me, but as an admin, I can get that level of feedback as well, and really determine, okay, if I'm hitting the mark with my basic setup and or configuration within the service and externally. So I'm going to give this another second to run. It shouldn't take much longer, and if it does, we'll switch to the backup slides. But basically, it's doing a last check. It looks like here. Within my SharePoint site and going through. I think I have a pretty extensive SharePoint site set up in this tenant. So it's doing some checks in there to validate, okay, is my trusted sites configured properly, and is my environment configured properly. The also thing I would like to call out is that the way I happen to navigate to this is I logged into the tenant first, but if you go directly to the URL, the AKA aka.ms/checkmypc, you'll also see that it'll prompt you with the login right there, and you'll be able to log in Office 365. So if I'm a user and or an admin, I don't have to navigate through a special section to get to that. We can just use the AKA link and get there pretty quickly. So we're going to give this about 20 more seconds and see if it finishes. It shouldn't take too long, but as you know, demos tend to always like to take longer than they need to, even though they might have taken 5 minutes or 5 seconds before. Just because I'm showing it now to you guys, it's going to take a little bit longer. But bottom line is, it's through most of the checks already. It's already done all the client-side work, and it's just finishing up checking the things on the server side. So if it takes a second here, I'm going to go ahead and just flip to the results so you can see these, and they probably will load just as I'm changing that. But I'll show you a quick glimpse of what those results would look like. So at this point in the test, 1 second to find the right screenshot here. Boom, boom, boom. Once it's completed, I'm going to move this over to this screen. You should still be seeing my screen. Let me know if you're not. But once it's completed, what I get is a quick set of results that let me know a couple of things about my domain configuration. I immediately know whether or not I'm deployed. I know I can quickly look here and see from based on categories that are interesting to me, what's the setup for my domain. So in some, or not, sorry, what's the setup for my organization? So in this case, I can look down and quickly see, all right, I'm interested in the client checks because I'm running this maybe as a user, and I can see with the context really quickly. All right, maybe I'm missing something, so it looks like I didn't have my trusted sites configured properly when I ran this before, which is an interesting result to me as a user, because it's something I can go change, or my administrator as well can go change on my behalf. If I flip over to the All Results tab, though, and as you see, there's some more context here around domains for administrators. But if I flip over to the All Results tab, I see a greater list of details, so I get more idea of the total set of checks that we're running. The only things that will manifest themselves in the Issues section or actual issues. You shouldn't see things there that didn't register as either a misconfiguration or something to be concerned about. But in the All Results tab, if I'm an administrator that's really interested in knowing, okay, what are some of my additional requirements, or what are some of the checks that are running, excuse me, you can quickly glance over and see, all right, there's certain domain checks that are running, there's support checks that are running at the client level, there's checks that are running against SharePoint, there's checks that are running against OneDrive, and you can get a real glimpse of what those checks look like. I think this one still says SkyDrive, but it's OneDrive. You'll see those results here quickly, and then right away, all right, maybe I configured, I have some work to do in the domain space, or maybe I know that ports are good. So basically, it gives you that information to help you eliminate a lot of the scenarios that you may or may not believe might be causing any issue you're experiencing, right? So there's two scenarios, like I said, you can run it, really targeted at preparation, but also in the validation perspective, if you've got a new user set up, it's a quick check that you can run on that client to make sure that, if you're running from images, or if you're running from, a single client perspective, that you're in a good state, right? You're meeting the best practices that Office 365 puts out there for you. So I'm going to go back to my lovely desktop, and this wonderful test is still running. But the bottom line is you'll see the results pretty quickly. You can view them, and you can analyze those and figure out what next steps are for you to do. Now, in addition to that, there's content that's associated with each one of those scenarios. I forgot to show you that when I was clicking through. But there's content associated with each one of those scenarios, so you can see which steps you need to do to remediate those issues. So in the domain space, if you need to say go configure some domains, it'll direct you to where to go in the portal to go solve that problem. If it was a scenario at the client level where you need to make a configuration change, it'll be able to provide you with the explicit steps on how to resolve those problems as well. So when we think, I'm going to flip back to my deck real quick just to wrap up on the Readiness Wizard. But the real keys to take away with, or you can access the wizard from the AKA link. I did still put the long link, if you will, on how to get there. You can go to the admin center and go down to tools and find those checks there as well. But primarily, you want to use this AKA/check my PC link, because, to be frank, it's convenient. It's more convenient than trying to remember how to navigate in the admin center. And then the other piece of it is that anyone can use this link, users or admins, and you're not restricted. There are some requirements in place today, and I know for those of you looking at my requirements list, you're wondering, why aren't there numbers next to these these requirements? The reason I'm not putting numbers there today is because they're changing very quickly, and the bar, if you will, is constantly being lowered to be able to run these clients. Today, right, we support Internet Explorer, obviously, and there are, depending on the checks you're running, requirements for PowerShell. The Windows framework and the .NET framework as well. Windows as a operating system and the .NET framework as well. But that actual scope is being expanded very rapidly, and the bar, if you will, for running these diagnostics is lowering on a weekly and sometimes monthly cycle. So they're doing a lot of good work to make these available to as many people as possible. So regardless of which setup you're in, from a Office 365 perspective, you will be able to run the Readiness Wizard and or the other diagnostics to do checks against your environment and really validate that you're in a good state. So that's the Readiness Wizard. I'm going to dive real quick into, or transition real quick into the next section, and then we'll break for questions. The other piece of the diagnostics puzzle, if you will, when we think about running diagnostics from within the context of the portal, is really looking at the Office 365 Admin Center. Now, I mentioned before excuse me, that there's a number of different diagnostics that are available to admins, and that many of those diagnostics, they're outside the service. Well, again, with the context of thinking about where people actually come to report issues, we're really thinking about, all right, if I'm an admin, I really want to know if and going to say file a support request or whatever on the admin center, I really want as much help as I can, right? To do one of two things, to better enable the person that I'm going to be talking to resolve my problem, or to be able to resolve it myself, right? I mean, ideally, again, no one really, in my mind, no one really wants to talk to support, right? If you can solve a problem on your own with a reasonable amount of effort or a minimal amount of effort, you want to do that, right? Especially if it's an automated solution, especially if it's a scenario where there may be something misconfigured, and even if it's just because you want to eliminate or remove suspicion from your own environment, diagnostics are a great way to do that. And the way we think about where we think about targeting those diagnostics is really around a lot of really basic common scenarios. We see a lot of customers contacting for potentially issues around Outlook or Outlook web app or link connectivity that are many times client related or overall configuration related. So we want to really do our best as support org to help you eliminate the potential causes and really narrow in on the solution more quickly, right? So as a part of that, there's a number of diagnostic checks that have gone in to the Office 365 support flow, if you will, to help you not only validate that you're in a good state, but point out some potential issues that may be causing one of many types of issues. Today, there's diagnostics targeted at Outlook connectivity, Outlook web app, and link connectivity, but there's many additional diagnostics being planned and actively worked on, targeting tons of more scenarios that are really crucial to our customers around business critical parts of Office 365. So not only things like connectivity, but also some overall setup issues that you may be having as well, including diagnostics or automation, I should say, to help supply things like hybrid configuration or get you licensed properly and so forth. So bottom line is there's a number of diagnostics that have been built in or baked into the experience now, and you should be seeing those if you go to file, say, a service request within the support portal. Again, I'm going to demo those real quick and give you a highlight what that experience should look like as you go through your diagnostic experience, if you will, and then we'll take a look back at some of the, at how we get access to all of these. 1 second again, I'm going to flip my screen again. And I'm back at the Office 365 Admin Center. I'm still logged into that same tenant I was logged into before. And likewise, I may, like I said, want to engage support because I'm having an issue with, for example, Outlook connectivity, meaning a number of my users are having Outlook connectivity issues. They're not able to connect to my organization or what have you. And I want to do some validation to figure out, try to figure out the root cause. So I may start by just simply creating a service request. And I'll go in our drop-down menu and I'll choose technical support and I'll choose, say, Exchange Online. And then I have the question of a service area. Now, in most of these scenarios that I've just described, they're really client-focused, right? So if I think about some client scenarios, I'm either going to have a problem with, things like Outlook Web App or Outlook for Windows or Mac or MOA or something like that. So in my case, I'm going to choose, to be interesting, I'll choose Outlook for Mac. Why not? And then I'll look at problem areas, and the most common problem that I would have is, I can't connect to my mailbox, right? Now, you'll notice really quickly that a pop-up appeared here to run a troubleshooter. Unlike some of our drop-downs, which point you to content, this one's really focused on, hey, we think we have an automated solution that might help you resolve your problem. So let's take a look and see if we can do that and apply that automation to help you, solve your problem and or provide a better context for the support engineer that's helping you resolve the problem, or that will be helping you resolve an issue. So if I click Run Troubleshooter, I'll see a quick pop-up. I see that I'm getting a pop-up for troubleshooting Outlook connectivity. And similar in terms of look and feel to the Readiness wizard, it initiates basically a set of tests. So it's doing a check against my environment and to make sure that I'm ready to run the client. It does a quick run of the ClickOnce client that just started. it starts to do some diagnostics against my environment. So it's doing similar checks, but not the same checks that are in the Readiness Wizard. These checks are actually very targeted at the Outlook connectivity scenario. We know today, just from like I said, I spend many days of my life in support cases, as well as my other colleagues, and we realize that we know most of the problems that our customers have, and most of the times we know why. So if we could fix it, if it's a product problem, we do what we can to fix it in the product. But if it's a scenario where there's actually something that it's a common misconfiguration or it's a common setup that may be causing the problem, that's where we actually go to look, right? We go to look in those scenarios and review and look at that diagnostics, and look at the scenarios that we know cause those problems to start troubleshooting those cases. In this case, in the Outlook connectivity case, for Mac specifically, we know that there's a lot of dependencies. Exchange Web Services, for example, is a dependency. Auto-discover is also a common dependency. There's dependencies on client version and validating how I'm getting to how I'm trying to do that connection, right? Do I have the right licenses in place? All those kind of scenarios that are common to my user set. And right now, what the troubleshooter is doing is similar to what we saw in the Readiness Wizard. It's actually running tests against my environment and working to do some validation that I am in basically a known good configuration. And all of those steps happen across both the client and the organization, because in this perspective, I'm an admin, right? So 9 times out of 10, even if I'm not a small business administrator, I may have access, or I may at least have either to our own IT infrastructure, or I have access to work with someone who manages, say, my IT infrastructure to help me remediate a problem. So if it's something simple like DNS configuration, they can help with that. If it's something that's slightly more complex, like something that's potentially within the service or something that's on the client side, I also may elicit help from other parts of my IT org. But the beauty of these results and the beauty of this system as well is I haven't left Office 365, right? I'm still within the service, I'm still within the context, and I'm running these checks really against my tenant actively in live. And you'll see it's doing some checks right now against some of the domains I have, and validating that those are being configured. I get a kind of a play-by-play for exactly what's happening. It's also checking my Outlook version to make sure I'm on the latest and greatest. Now, I see you see it's done now, and I get my set of results, and there's a number of issues that have popped up. None client specific, meaning I'm running the latest and greatest, which, to be frank, you would probably expect because I'm also on the cloud. My mailbox is there, and I'm running obviously the latest version of Office Pro Plus. But if I wasn't, or if I was running 2010, or if I was running 2007, it would still detect issues related to that client, and not specific to, hey, you're just not running the latest, but actual issues that we know exist within potentially Outlook 2007, 2010, or 2013, or future versions as well. Also does checks against known OS misconfiguration. So I again happen to be running Exchange. Sorry, not Exchange. I'm sorry. I'm running Windows 8.1 in my case. But if I was running something else, it would be able to do detections against that as well to validate, okay, am I in a known good configuration to be able to run these? It popped up with a couple issues around my domains. I can go back to see all the issues. Again, similar checks or similar style of viewing the results that I show in the Readiness Wizard because they're based on a similar on the shared platform. But from a support perspective, not only do you get these results, but if, say, for instance, this doesn't resolve your problem, right? If you can't find the issue you're looking for, or you don't know how to solve the issue, right? For example, if you don't know how to configure that CNAME record, you can continue to create the case, and a support engineer who answers that call will already have these diagnostics in hand, meaning they'll know from a scope perspective exactly what you're calling for and potentially what your resolutions are and what work you need to do to remediate that. On the latter hand, if this does resolve your problem, right? If you look at this and you see, oh, that's what the problem is, you go and rerun the check, right? You'll know immediately, great, okay, I've reran this check, the problem is no longer here, say my DNS record is configured now, or my Outlook is set up the way it's supposed to be, or what have you, and then you don't have to actually and then you get the benefit of not having to be able to revalidate that your environment's good and that your issue is resolved, and you don't have to create the service request. So say this doesn't solve my problem, I want to keep going. like I said, I don't have to go back and re-identify my issue because we already know what your issue is. You've already scoped it to us. All we need you to do now is just fill in the normal details like you would, and you continue on to create the service request like you normally would. And then when that support engineer answers the phone, they're empowered with those results, meaning they're able to help you and pick up where you left off. You've done your due diligence or part of your due diligence for troubleshooting, so they're able to help you by not repeating the same steps, not asking these same questions, but actually picking up where you left off in the troubleshooting process and working to your resolution. So net from a goal perspective and from the end result, your experience is faster. You don't have to spend as long on the phone with us, frankly, and your issues get resolved more quickly. So I'm not going to go ahead and create the service request because I know I'd get a number of pings via link very quickly for a new service request that popped up from me. But this is the overall process, and this is what you would do, or what's available now. So when we think about where these diagnostics are available, they're all over the place. Like I said, we're iterating weekly and monthly and putting out new diagnostics to help solve your problems. But the key is that right now they're still administrator only. There's work being done to extend that, but I think for most of most scenarios, the Readiness Wizard handles a lot of those standard checks that users will need. But these scenarios are really targeted at administrators or people that are filing the service request and looking for help to solve problems. Where possible, like I said, there's automation in place. So if there is a solution where we can automate it, and I'm going to walk you through some of those automated ones in a moment, we can apply that automation, though, and do some checks to help you resolve problems. Again, I showed you an example that happened to be under Outlook for Mac, but there's scenarios under Link and Exchange today, and new scenarios showing up in other diagnostic or other parts of the service over time as well. And the other thing that I would call out as a note is that not every problem area that you see actually has a diagnostic associated with it. This isn't a run this diagnostic every time kind of scenario. We only want you to really run a diagnostic when we think it'll be a benefit for you, right? So as we iterate and as we build out new diagnostics, we'll have you run them, or we'll ask that you run them to help us solve your problems more quickly. But it's not. But at this point, there's no default, let's run a diagnostic for running a diagnostic sake. As I alluded to before, when I started the conversation earlier, you only really want to run the diagnostic when it matters, right? If you're going in for a regular oil change, then you can say oil change and we get it. But if you're going in for something else, we really want to know what it is, right? We want to be able to help provide that context to help us solve your problem. So I'm going to take a break real quick and answer some questions and drink a little water. Are there any questions at this point about the scenarios we've covered and the tools we've covered so far? Looks like I'm going to check the IM.
Yeah, there's a few in the IM, Jeremy.
Okay, let's look. Sandeep asks, does it support 8.1? Yes, the Readiness Wizard does support 8.1, and that support's being expanded rapidly beyond 8.1 to other browsers. I think other operating systems and/or browsers as well over the next several months. So we should see things like expanded support for third-party as well come in the coming weeks and months. Another question here is, yes, the Readiness Wizard can run on multiple PCs at a time. It's not limited to run on one, meaning if you want to log in as a user and say, go run it in multiple places, that works just fine. There's no limitation around where it can run. Can we use the Office 365 environment already deployed to see if there is any misconfiguration? Yes, actually, that's perfect. The Readiness Wizard actually is perfectly targeted for that. Like I said, we focus it on preparation because we know that's when people typically have problems. And I don't know if I stated the question fully, but the question was essentially, can we run it on if you already have an established environment? 100% yes. But like I said, we built it targeted at where we know people have problems in the life cycle, but you can run the tool at any time, at any phase of the life cycle to validate that you're in a good state. And we actually recommend that you do that. We restrict who uses it. So say you don't want your clients to use it. So in that scenario, for the actual Readiness Wizard itself, that's an interesting one. To my knowledge, the answer is no today, but I can definitely pass that feedback back along to the product group because I think that'd be an interesting scenario to look at. And it looks like lots of more questions popping in. I'll take a few more and then we'll do it to the second section. So someone reported, I'm using IE8 and planning to use Chrome. Will the tool work? That's from Ravi as well. Today, the answer is no, but the answer will not be no in several months. I don't have an exact date for you at this point, but they're working quickly to expand access. So if we do this deck, say, 3-4 months down the road, the story will most likely be different, and you'll be able to run it on any of our supported configurations, meaning anything that's in our system requirements, our software requirements page is supported O365 configuration, you'll be able to run it. So for all supported Office clients, for all supported browsers, and so forth. I'm going to answer these last two, and then we'll move on. Case creation enhance allow. So the question is, will the case creation be enhanced to allow the case to flow through the Premier channel and allow them to also pick up, have access to the diag details? Yes, and there's work being done to make that happen. How it works today is not it's not that simple is the bottom line. But send me mail on that, Paul. I think we can. I have some deeper explanations I can give to you on what the plans are for that. But there are some plans being developed to handle that scenario. To clarify my questions, admin targeted multiple. Okay, sorry. And Samuel put in a clarification. He's asking, as an admin, can you target multiple machines to run it at the same time? That's a very interesting scenario. The answer is no today. I can tell you that. But it is something that I can take back as well. That's a very interesting scenario that makes sense to me, and especially if you're an admin wanting to do that check and be able to run those checks prior to deployment. I think that totally makes sense. So I'll collect that and pass that along as well. Thanks for the questions and the feedback. Awesome. So we're going to move on to the next section, talk through some more specific scenarios. Let me get back to deck here and minimize things again. It looks like we have about 18 minutes left, so I want to make sure I can get through at least two of these demos I have here. I have a couple, but we'll see what we can get through. So domain management and domain diagnostics. Again, because of my particular area of focus from supportability, I kind of I live and die with a lot of the scenarios that end up popping up out of the domain configuration space and user management, things around the general Office 365 platform. So when we think about configuring domains, there's a couple key things that you're doing typically, right? It's a pretty straightforward experience, but oftentimes people get snagged in a couple places. So when you're doing domain management, we have this concept of adding or verifying what we call a custom or vanity domain. So this means if I have a top-level domain like contoso.com, I want to be able to add that to the service. So I can use that when sending out mail and so forth. The other part of that is if you want to remove that domain, because either you're doing, an expansion, a consolidation, you're moving tenants for some, logistical reason. We have lots of organizations that you end up, buying one another or what have you. They end up needing to consolidate from a management perspective. So removing a domain is a pretty common task within the service. The other part of that, outside of the basic of getting my domain so I can use it within the service, it's actually configuring it, right? And this is where the apples to apples piece of it, if you will, where I'm really doing the actual work. I'm setting up DNS records, I'm setting up Exchange records, link records, to SharePoint records, or what have you, right? And this is a pretty tall order in many cases for a lot of our small business customers, especially if I'm a customer who, I don't live and die with DNS every day. This isn't what I do for a living, right? I just happen to, join the shortest straw, if you will. And I'm the guy who just needs to know how to get this set up so we can get our mail up and working and link up and working and SharePoint sites working as well. So right now, the goal or a lot of the work has been dedicated or centered around lowering that bar, so that I don't have to do as much or understand all the ins and outs of this, but I can go and utilize the service and get onboarded a lot more quickly. So there's a couple of places where there's work been done. I'm going to walk through some of that in both the domain management section and in the domain troubleshooters. But then I want to just highlight before I dive into that, just to provide more context. There are a number of different types of records that we use, right, within the service. Common DNS records, right? Auto Discover records, that happens to be a text record. SPF records for spam prevention. MX records, there's records for link around configuring federation, also for client auto discover. So there's a lot of endpoints where all of the clients, even Outlook web app uses auto discover in hybrid scenarios, right? There's a lot of these places where we really, again, we don't want to go outside the service, right? The thing is, we want to be able to use it within the context of the service and help it to use the service to solve our problem. So I come back to that point again because really that's the nexus of all of this work. It's really around letting the service solve the problem for you, and working in there to do so. So I'm gonna walk through a couple of quick demos in that, and I'm gonna just switch to my my VM to do that. But let me see if it works in this VM. Oh, it's the hypervisor bit. Where's it at? Here we go. There we go. Logged in. So this so Windows. I think it's Windows 7 VM. Yep. And let me know if you can't see this. It should be. I'm zooming in as much as possible. The URLs you might not be able to see, but you should be able to see the page. So I'm going to log back into the same tenant I just used. Of course, it would have deleted itself just because I was already in there. Oh, of course. That's what happens if you test your demos thoroughly. You always get a timeout. But either way. So again, I'm in the portal, right? And I'm going to do some basic domain management work. So again, in my case, I have a couple of domains that I've already added. I did not want to walk through the full verification process here, but I will show it to you in probably another session. But bottom line is, I have a couple domains here. Some of these domains are hosted in different places. They're hosted with different providers. I get my default domain. I have this domain, which is hosted through another third-party provider, and then two other domains here listed. So in all of these scenarios, there's a couple of things that you commonly need to do, right? You commonly may run into as a problem. The first one we talked about is around adding and verifying, right? So the adding and verifying scenario, I did. I can't demo it now because I just realized I already did it, but in this case, I happen to have a domain that's registered to GoDaddy, right? And if you may have noticed, we had some integration that we added with GoDaddy, I believe a couple months back, around being able to purchase a domain, right? So in that magical case, if I happen to purchase a domain via them or via another provider, I get a lot of things provided to me, meaning I get context provided to me around, all right, how do I verify this domain? What records do I need to use, and so forth. In this case, I've already verified this domain, and I used the actual built-in automation to do that verification. So it did, the Office 365 domain manager detected that this domain is a GoDaddy domain, for example, and it did that piece for me. I want to show you though what it looks like if, say, for instance, I haven't configured the DNS records for that domain, but I've done the other part. I'm going to hit cancel real quick. And I'm going to show you, in this case, is a domain that I'm going to use the domain troubleshooter for. If I click troubleshoot, it's a pretty basic, quick test that lets me know right off, okay, is my domain good, bad, or ugly? And you saw I did a quick test, made sure I was still verified, and it came back with just a quick warning. Hey, looks like you're missing records, right? And in this case, I'm missing records for all over the place. I don't have any link records set up. I don't have any exchange records set up. So I get the context that not only am I missing records, but I need to go configure them. I can click this Learn Now link to do that configuration. And that's, for an advanced IT admin or even an enterprise administrator, it's a low bar. I mean, they're relatively comfortable with DNS. But if I'm a small business customer, right, I don't necessarily have that level of familiarity. So in that case, where I have a domain that may be registered with a third party that we have integration with, like GoDaddy, I can take that to the next level. So again, I'm going back to the domain I showed you before. I'd already, in this case, I've already verified it, but I haven't actually done anything else. I haven't assigned any users with licenses. In this case, I'm going to skip that step. But more importantly, I haven't actually done. I haven't actually done added my DNS records that I need for it. So it would give me a similar errors that you saw before when I showed you the top level domain where, hey, we haven't configured the DNS records for this domain yet. In this case, I'm going to skip the adding users because I'm not interested in doing that right now. But what I am interested in doing is setting up my domain, right, using it, right? So if I go through the add domain wizard and I just click step 3, or I can click directly on that step. Excuse me. I specify pretty straightforwardly how I want to use it. In my case, I have a pretty simple tenant. it's Exchange, it's Link. It's really straightforward. If I wanted to do hybrid, I could check a box down here. If I wanted to do something else, like using Exchange Online Protection, I could check that box. But my configuration happens to be pretty straightforward, like most small business customers. I can click Next really quick. And then we detect basically who your domain registrar is. Now, in this case, we're detecting the domain registrar is GoDaddy, because, like I said, we happen to have integration with them. So, of course, I'm going to use that one for the demo. But bottom line is, we have integration, and I checked it on really quickly, and I see that. So I can hit Set Up Records, and basically what we're offering to do is go configure that on your behalf. So I'm going to go type in my username and creds here that are changing in about 5 minutes, so don't worry about that. And I'm going to go ahead and log in. So as soon as I log in, all I have to do is accept that I want to make the changes. I hit accept, and it goes out and it does a little bit of work for me. And if you'll notice, instead of me having to go and do it, it does it for me. Boom, it just went out, configured every DNS record I need to configure in the service to get me set up. And out of the gate, as a small business customer or even an enterprise customer that's looking to expand, I'm done, right? If I'm in the cloud already, I'm done. I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to go and configure new records. Now, if I'm in a hybrid case, of course I have the option of going back to that third party's site and manually configuring via their domain configuration with their domain wizards for configuring it, their managers for configuring DNS records. There's the words. But in this case, I didn't have to do any of that. It was just as quick as you saw. I didn't. This isn't a shimmed environment. This is in prod. It just went configure my DNS records, and now they're already in place. So that when I hit finish now and go back and do a check, you'll see it's already active. There's no continued setup I need to do. I can click troubleshoot real quick, and it'll come back and validate that. Hopefully, if it cooperates with me. Come on. Here we go. It'll come back and validate that, boom, my domains are already in place, right? I got every additional record I need. I'm in good shape for a SharePoint case. I'm in good step for Exchange, good step for Link. And even if I, say, chose that hybrid option along the way, it would account for that too, which is some of the additions and changes that have happened in the automation perspective since then. So what we've shown or what we've seen is that we have the beauty of automation built in. We're taking advantage of that and providing that where possible. We're extending this integration as over time, and we're making it basically as simple as possible to get you onboarded and to get you automated past that first set of scenarios. Because, like I said, this really to me fits in that plan stage, that plan changes, or that prep stage. It really depends on your scenario. But instead of having to go figure out how to configure a domain or do all that, I was able to buy this domain. I think I bought it this morning, actually. I bought it right before the call. So I bought the domain. I have it added. I have it configured, in two shakes of a lamb's tail, for lack of a better analogy. And likewise, if I want to go back and see, say I do an update, or I go in my other domain provider and configure one of these other domains, I can do that really quickly from this. I can click here and look at the records and troubleshoot them, and it'll update it based on what records I have in place. So that's one scenario. The other scenario, which I think I have 2 quick minutes to show, and I'll try to give you a quick example, and if we run out of time, I'll save the last 5 minutes for questions. But it's pretty straightforward as well. Say I want to remove a domain, right? And again, previously, I know personally from personal experience, this is not, this can be a non-trivial experience in Office 365, because you may have dependencies on that domain. You may be using it in a SharePoint site. You may be using it maybe attached to certain users as a UPN, maybe attached to groups or shared mailboxes or any other object type that's labeled with that record. In the past, what you would get is basically a pop-up that would send you back to say you need to go fix something. What we've done though now, or what the work that's happened now, is that not only have we told you not only are we telling you what the problem is, but we're leading you more precisely to how to solve it. So in my case, I'm giving you a pretty short example. I have this domain. I run this.net. I want to remove this domain from my Office 365 tenant. And it gives me a warning automatically. It says, hey, you can't remove the domain if it's associated with places already, and I'm fine with that. But I'm going to click yes, and it notices right away, hey, you know what your problem is? I run this.net set to your default domain, meaning if I create a new user, this is the domain they get by default. If you want to remove it, you need to change that. So instead of making me figure out how to go change that, I change it right here. I don't have to go all over the place. I can change that to my backdoor filer's address, for example, and hit continue. And it'll check and continue to check for additional problems. Now, in this case, again, Previously, if I get this warning, it would basically stop here. I wouldn't be able to continue on. What it does here is it tells me not only here's a warning, but here's how to fix it. So I get this prompt that says, great, we figured out there's a couple users that may have, the irunthis.net UPN suffix attached to them. Takes me straight to where I need to go, gives me a view with those users in it directly, which is it's a custom view. So I get those users that are affected directly, and I can go in and detach that or change that. So in my case, I'm going to go here quickly and edit this user. Go under settings here, I think it is. Actually, sorry, it's under details. Change this. I'm going to change it to the same one I changed the default to, backdoors filers. It'll give me a little warning that says it'll take a little while, but it's going to do it. And it does that change. Now, the beauty of this, when I go through the menu to initiate this change, and I come back here, and I click remove again, it knows, hey, he clicked on that menu and he went through and did something, meaning he did that I did the change that was requested or that was detected. And what it should do, if it works for me, is it'll automatically then go and remove not only the acknowledge that removal of the change in UPN suffix, but remove the objects on the back end that are also tied to it. So say in Exchange, I had that UPN suffix added to a user, but it wasn't their primary. It'll remove it for me right then and there. So I don't have to go and dig through all my Exchange users that, say, for instance, don't have, say, irunthis.net as their primary, but have it as a secondary SMTP address or email address. It does that removal on my behalf. So it's out there right now, talking to the other services, hopefully, and doing the removal for me and cleaning up the domain across the service. So now I don't have to go and worry about it being, having some place where some part of the configuration is still attached to. It's actually going out in SharePoint, flipping my SharePoint site over, going out in Exchange, removing the SMTPs that I assigned to some of those other users, and fixing the problem right there for me. And it should come back here in a second if my demo gods still work with me, and show you that the domain's been removed. But while I'm waiting for that, I'll come back to it because we're right at time, and I want to make sure we leave some time for questions before I wrap up. So I'll wrap up really quickly and open the floor for questions. So we talked about a couple of different scenarios today. Here's a quick snapshot of those scenarios. We looked at Office 365 Readiness and the Readiness Wizard. We looked at some common places where we see issues around Outlook connectivity, link connectivity, and we have some links on how to get to the support page and which services we find those scenarios under. Remember, not all problem areas actually have diagnostics today. We only really provide them where it makes sense to improve your experience. And then lastly, we talked about the domain manager and the domain management in general within the context of adding, removing, and configuring domains via automation or otherwise. So here's where we are today on these scenarios. This list that I'm looking at today is only going to expand as time extends. And so if you have any questions, please feel free. I think Heather has her email at the end. So if you have any additional questions that we were not able to get to, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll address those. But I'll open the floor again for questions, and I'll take a look at the IM to see. I think there's been some activity over there as well.